Welcome. Let your shoulders drop, and let your breath find a slower rhythm. There is nowhere to be right now, except here, in this old story, drifting beside a river that has been flowing since before the first word was written. Let today loosen its grip. We will walk slowly into the past, and you may fall asleep at any point along the way. The sky begins to lighten over the eastern desert cliffs. A thin band of amber creeps along the jagged horizon, spreading upward into rose and pale gold. The limestone cliffs, worn by wind for countless ages, catch the first color before anything below them stirs. Down in the valley, the Nile still lies dark and unmoving, a long ribbon of shadow waiting for morning. Temple priests wake before dawn to purify themselves. In small stone chambers attached to the temple precinct, they rise from simple mats and walk to basins of cool water drawn the evening before. Each priest washes his mouth, his hands, his shaved scalp, following practices recorded on temple walls at sites such as Karnak. Linen kilts, freshly laundered, are laid out for them by temple attendants. Priests break the clay seal on the shrine doors. Each night, the doors enclosing the god statue are sealed with a lump of soft clay, stamped and left untouched until morning. Now a priest kneels before the dark wooden doors, cracks the seal free, and eases them open. Cool air, thick with old incense, drifts out into the hushed sanctuary. The first ritual water is drawn from the sacred temple lake. Beside the great stone hall, a rectangular basin holds still water reserved only for temple use. A priest descends worn steps at its edge and fills a narrow jar, careful not to disturb the surface. This water will bathe the god's statue before the sun climbs higher. Priests recite hymns to greet the rising sun god Ra. Their voices, low and steady, rise together inside the stone hall as the very first light touches the horizon. Words preserved on temple walls describe Ra sailing his solar bark across the heavens, pushing back the darkness once more. Outside, the sky has turned fully gold, and somewhere a bird calls across the fields. Farmers rise with the first light to check the Nile's water level. Along the muddy banks, a man crouches to study the marks left by yesterday's water against a worn post. The level tells him how the coming season may unfold, whether the fields will drink deeply or thirst. Behind him, the village is only beginning to stir, doorways still dark. Roosters and geese signal the start of the household day. Their calls echo between the close-built mud-brick walls of the village lanes, waking sleepers who had lingered a little longer. Somewhere, a door of woven reeds creaks open. A woman steps out into the cool air, carrying an empty water jar toward the well. Bread dough set to rise overnight is prepared for baking. In a small mud-brick kitchen open to the sky, a woman uncovers a clay bowl where dough has swollen since the evening before. She kneads it once more on a flat stone slab, dusting her hands with coarse flour. The morning air still carries the coolness of night, though the sun is climbing fast. Women grind emmer wheat into flour, using stone querns. Kneeling before heavy grinding stones set low to the ground, they push a smaller stone back and forth across grain, the motion steady and practiced. The work is slow and repeated many times each morning, turning hard kernels into pale, coarse flour. Dust rises faintly in the low light, settling again on the packed earth floor. Breath moves in, unhurried, and moves out longer than it came. Let the next inhale arrive on its own, without reaching for it. Each exhale can stretch a little further than the last, like a tide easing back from the shore. There is no pace to keep. The body already knows how to let go, one long breath at a time, sinking a little deeper into stillness with every release. Beer brewing begins using fermented bread and water. Loaves baked specifically for this purpose are crumbled into large clay vats, then mixed with water and left to ferment under the growing warmth of morning. The mixture bubbles faintly, sweet and yeasty, a staple that will nourish the household through the hardest hours of labor. Even children in the village know this drink by taste, before they know its name. Children help herd goats toward the riverbank pastures. Barefoot and quick, they carry small switches of palm rib, guiding the animals along a worn dirt path between mud brick walls. The goats bleat and scatter, nosing at scrub grass growing near the water's edge. Older children walk ahead, calling softly to keep the herd together as the morning heat begins to build. Fishermen launch papyrus, reed boats onto the still water. The vessels, light and buoyant, slide easily from the muddy bank into the current, propelled by a single paddle worked from the stern. Men stand balanced with practiced ease, scanning the surface for ripples that betray fish below. The reeds beneath their feet creak faintly with each shift of weight, a sound as familiar to them as their own footsteps. Nets and traps are set along the shallow reed banks. Woven from flax and papyrus fiber, the nets stretch between wooden stakes driven into the mud, while conical basket traps rest half submerged among the stalks. Fish drift unknowingly toward these snares as the water warms with morning light. By midday, some of these traps will already hold a modest catch waiting to be gathered. The sun fully rises, marking the start of Ray's daily journey. Egyptians understood this moment as the god crossing into the visible sky aboard his solar bark, beginning a passage that would end again at dusk. Light spreads evenly now across fields, rooftops, and the wide brown ribbon of the river. Shadows that stretched long at dawn begin to shorten and gather closer to their source. Farmers walk to fields carrying wooden hoes and baskets. The tools are simple, worn smooth by years of handling, their handles darkened where countless palms have gripped them. Baskets woven from reed swing at their sides, empty now but destined to hold seed or harvest before the day ends. The path to the fields runs along low earthen dikes, still damp from the night's dew. Oxen are yoked to wooden plows for the morning's work. A farmer guides the animals with a length of rope and a low, steady call, urging them forward across furrowed soil. The plow's wooden blade cuts shallow lines into earth softened by the river's earlier floodwaters. Birds trail behind, dipping down to snatch insects turned up from the freshly broken ground. Shut off water, lifting devices begin their creaking rhythm. Each machine balances a long wooden pole on a fulcrum, a weighted counterbalance on one end, and a leather bucket on the other. A worker dips the bucket into the river, then lets the counterweight lift it smoothly upward to pour into a waiting channel. The motion repeats for hours, steady and unbroken, up and down like a slow heartbeat along the water's edge. Canals channel Nile water into thirsty grain fields. Dug and maintained by generations of villagers, these narrow earthen waterways branch outward from the main river like veins across the land. Wooden sluice gates control the flow, opened and closed by hand to direct water where it is needed most. The fields darken as moisture spreads through dry soil, a quiet transformation repeated every growing season. A small courtyard beside the temple fills with young voices reciting in unison. Boys sit cross-legged on mats, wooden writing boards balanced on their knees, waiting for the lesson to begin. Their teacher, a senior scribe, carries a satchel of reed pens and a pot of prepared ink. Sons of officials and craftsmen alike gather here, for skill with the pen can lift a family's fortunes for generations to come. Let the weight of the day settle into the mattress beneath you. Feel your feet grow heavy first, sinking as though the bed itself were rising softly to meet them. Let that heaviness climb into your ankles, your knees, spreading upward like warmth, poured slowly through your limbs. Your shoulders loosen and drop, your arms grow full and still. There is only this weight, this stillness, this body, resting exactly where it lies. Rows of broken pottery pieces are handed out to the youngest students. These fragments, called ostraca, serve as cheap practice surfaces where mistakes cost nothing. Boys dip reed brushes and trace the flowing, simplified signs of hieratic script, copying lines their teacher has written above. Some fragments discovered by archaeologists still bear these childish, uneven strokes preserved by the dry desert air across thousands of years. A shallow dish holds the morning's fresh ink, mixed just before lessons start. Soot scraped from lamp wicks or cooking fires provides the black pigment, bound together with a little gum and water. The mixture is worked with a finger or small stick until it turns smooth and dark, ready to be dipped and drawn across pottery or papyrus. This same basic recipe will serve scribes for the whole of their working lives. Along the lane near the temple precinct, wooden shutters are pulled back from workshop doorways. Dust rises in thin columns as tools are gathered from baskets and shelves. Carpenters, masons, jewelers, and potters each claim their accustomed corner of the district. Workspaces passed down within families for generations. The temple's needs for statues, furniture, and ritual objects keep this quarter of the town in steady, unbroken activity. Wood shavings curl onto the workshop floor as carpenters begin their day's shaping. Acacia and imported cedar are cut and joined for chairs, chests, and headrests destined for wealthier homes. Elsewhere in the same workshop, simpler planks are measured for coffins, their proportions following patterns fixed by long tradition. The carpenter's tools, a bow drill, adze, and chisel, are much the same as those his grandfather once used. Stone chips fly steadily as masons work near the temple's outer wall. Blocks of limestone, quarried from nearby cliffs, are chipped and smoothed to extend the sanctuary's growing structure. Hopper chisels and stone pounders wear down slowly against the pale rock, replaced often throughout a long career. Additions to temples happen gradually, one reign layered carefully atop another across centuries of patient labor. A jeweler's workbench holds small heaps of colored beads, sorted by shade and size. Faience, a blue-green glazed material, sits beside darker carnelian stones brought from desert trade routes. Fine linen thread is drawn carefully through each pierced bead, forming necklaces and bracelets destined for temple offerings or wealthy households. The steady, repetitive motion of stringing beads fills the small workshop with a quiet clicking rhythm. Nearby, a potter kneels beside a simple turning device, feet steadying its base, while hands shape wet clay. The wheel, little more than a stone disc set upon a pivot, spins as the potter presses a lump of river clay into a rising vessel wall. Water jars, storage pots, and offering bowls take shape one after another, left to dry beneath the growing warmth of the morning sun. Across the workshop yard, weavers stretch linen thread across upright wooden looms. The thread, spun earlier from harvested flax, is tied taut between horizontal beams before the weaving itself can begin. Women work the loom in pairs sometimes, passing shuttles of thread back and forth in patient, practiced rhythm. Linen produced this way will clothe farmers and nobles alike, its fineness alone marking the difference between them. Flax stalks harvested weeks earlier now become thread fine enough for royal linen. Retted and dried, the fibers are combed straight before spinners twist them between fingers and thigh, drawing out strands of remarkable evenness. The finest threads, thin as a hair, will be woven into cloth reserved for temple statues and noble households. Coarser thread serves ordinary tunics worn by farmers and laborers alike. Vendors near the water's edge lay out reed mats and prop up simple wooden frames for their goods. Baskets of onions, jars of oil, strings of dried fish, and stacks of pottery bowls appear in neat rows along the path. Some sellers travel from nearby villages, arriving by donkey before the heat rises. Buyers wander between stalls, exchanging goods and greetings beneath the shade of riverside palms. Somewhere beyond the walls, a low hum rises and fades, carried on shifting air. It might be wind moving through reeds, or a distant voice folding into silence. It arrives without announcement and leaves the same way, asking nothing of you. Let your shoulders sink a little further into whatever holds you. There is only this hum, coming and going, and the slow rise and fall of your own breath beneath it. No coins pass between hands in this marketplace, for Egypt has none yet in daily use. Instead, value is measured in fixed units called deben, weights of copper or silver used only to judge fairness. A basket of grain might be worth a certain number of deben, matched against a jar of oil worth the same. Goods change hands directly, one need answered by another. A farmer trades sacks of grain for a length of woven cloth, while a fisherman offers his morning catch for a jar of sesame oil. Clay pots move from a potter's stall into the arms of a household servant, exchanged for baskets of dried fish. Every transaction depends on rough agreement, haggled quietly between buyer and seller until both judge the trade fair. Donkeys move steadily along the packed dirt paths connecting village to market, their backs loaded with baskets and sealed jars. Handlers walk beside them, guiding the animals with a light touch of rope rather than force. These small, sure-footed creatures carry grain, pottery, and bundled linen across distances too far to walk with a full load. Their patient pace sets the rhythm of the morning's trade. Near the village granary, a scribe crouches beside sacks of grain, counting measures with practiced ease. He marks each delivery onto a papyrus sheet, recording the farmer's name and the exact quantity owed to the state. This tally will determine taxes assessed later in the season, based on the land's yield. His reed pen moves in short, sure strokes across the sheet. Behind the village, tall mud-brick granaries rise in rounded domes, their narrow openings sealed against pests and damp. Grain poured in during harvest season will feed the community through leaner months, and through years when the Nile's flood falls short. These structures, built and maintained by careful planning, protect against a hunger that has visited the valley before and will likely come again. By midday, the sun stands high enough to press down on every open field and pathway. Farmers set aside their hoes, potters cover their wet clay, and vendors pull cloth awnings low over their stalls. The valley grows still, movement retreating indoors or beneath whatever shade can be found. Even the donkeys stand motionless, ears low, waiting out the heat. Beneath broad sycamore branches and the long shadows of date palms, workers gather to wait out the harshest hours. Some stretch out on woven mats, others lean against trunks worn smooth by years of shared rest. Conversation drifts lazily between neighbors, punctuated by the occasional call of a bird overhead. The trees, planted generations earlier, now shelter descendants of the very hands that first set them in the ground. Under the shade, families gather around flat loaves, sliced onions, and clay cups filled from the morning brew. This meal asks little preparation, since bread and beer were made hours before at first light. Bites are taken between quiet exchanges, the day's labor set aside for a short while. Even officials and laborers eat much the same fare, differing only in the size of the portion or the cup. Beer here is no luxury but a staple, brewed thick and mildly sweet from fermented barley bread. Children drink a weaker version, while laborers on state projects sometimes receive it as part of their daily wages. Its low alcohol content makes it safer to drink than untreated river water. Jars of it sit cooling in shaded corners of every household, from farmer's hut to scribe's dwelling. Along the riverbank, fishermen lay out their morning catch on woven mats to dry beneath the sun. Salt gathered from desert flats is rubbed into the flesh, drawing out moisture that would otherwise invite decay. Strips of fish hang from wooden racks, curling slowly in the heat and light. Preserved this way, the catch might last for weeks, feeding a household long after the river has gone still again. Feel the warmth begin at your fingertips, spreading up through the palm and into the wrist. Let it climb into your forearm, unhurried, like sun soaking through cloth. It reaches the shoulder next, loosening whatever has gathered there through the day. Let that warmth pool in your chest, then drift down through your ribs and into your stomach, settling low and even. There is no need to follow it further. Just let it rest where it has gathered, and let your breath match its stillness. Down by the water's edge, women kneel to fill tall clay jars from the river's flow. The jars are wide at the belly and narrow at the neck, shaped to hold as much as possible without spilling on the walk home. Some pause to speak with neighbors doing the same task, their voices low over the sound of water lapping against reeds. This trip to the river repeats several times through the day, a rhythm as steady as the current itself. Once filled, the jars are lifted and settled atop a folded cloth cushion balanced on the head. This method frees both hands and distributes the weight down through the spine rather than the arms. Girls learn the skill young, practicing first with lighter, half-filled vessels. Along the village paths, a line of women moves with jars held steady, back straight, steps measured to avoid a single drop lost to the dust. Inside the temple, the heat of noon changes nothing about the priest's schedule. Robes are changed, hands washed again in the sacred basin, and the rhythm of hymns continues beneath cool stone ceilings. Sunlight falls in narrow shafts through high openings, marking the hour without need of any clock. The temple's inner rooms remain shadowed and cool, untouched by the glare pressing down outside. Before the god's statue, a priest sets out bread, meat, and beer arranged on small offering tables. The meal is presented with full ceremony, as though the god himself might reach for it. Afterward, the offerings are removed and distributed among the temple staff, a practice recorded on inscriptions from several temple sites. The god, in this understanding, receives the meal's essence, while the substance sustains those who serve him. Smoke curls upward from a shallow dish set before the innermost shrine, its scent thick and resinous. Frankincense and myrrh, carried up the Red Sea trade routes from distant lands, are burned without pause through the hours of daylight. The smoke is thought to purify the air around the god's presence and please him with its fragrance. Even after the priests withdraw, the incense continues its slow burn into the empty room. Beyond a certain point, no one but the highest-ranking priest may pass through the shrine's final doorway. This inner sanctum, cloaked in near darkness, houses the statue believed to hold the god's living presence. Even kings, on occasion, deferred to the priesthood in matters concerning this room. Its threshold, worn smooth by centuries of careful footsteps, marks a boundary few in Egypt would ever cross. Beyond the sanctuary walls, common worshippers gather in open courtyards where sunlight reaches the stone floor freely. They cannot pass into the shadowed rooms reserved for priests, but here, near painted columns, they leave small offerings of bread, flowers, or a folded strip of linen. Prayers are spoken aloud or murmured low, addressed to the god whose statue rests unseen beyond several doors. This outer court, open to the sky, serves as the meeting place between ordinary life and the divine. Around wrists, necks, and waists, small carved charms are worn without a second thought, as ordinary as a bracelet or belt. Faience frogs, scarabs, and eyes of protection are strung on cord or linen thread, meant to turn aside sickness, accidents, or the ill will of unseen forces. A mother might tie one around an infant's ankle before setting the child down to sleep. These small objects, found by archaeologists in homes across the Nile Valley, speak of a world where protection was carried on the body itself. Inside many mud brick homes, a modest niche in the wall holds a carved image of a squat, grinning figure with a lion's mane and a protruding tongue. This is Bes, a household god whose shrine needs no priest and no formal offering table. Families place small figurines of him near beds, doorways, and cooking areas, treating his presence as a kind of quiet guardian built into daily routine. Unlike the great stake gods, Bes belongs entirely to the home. Bes is invoked above all for the safety of mothers and their newborn children, a role reflected in countless amulets, headrests, and painted objects unearthed from ordinary households. His fierce, almost comic appearance was believed to frighten away malevolent spirits before they could reach a sleeping infant. Women in labor might have his image nearby, carved into a bed leg, or painted on a wall close by. Fierceness, in this belief, served protection rather than harm. Somewhere past the last mud brick wall, a fire that has burned all afternoon is settling into embers, its light shrinking to a low red glow. No one tends it now. It simply dims, coal by coal, the heat easing outward into the surrounding air until only a faint warmth remains where flame once stood. Let your own thoughts settle the same way, fading ember by ember, needing no one to watch them go. Intuir inablio win te blide. Another figure is called upon throughout the day, one shaped like an upright hippopotamus with human arms and the tail of a crocodile. Teirit watches over pregnancy and delivery, her image carved into amulets, headrests, and small clay figures kept close during labor. Midwives and family members alike appeal to her, a practice recorded across many centuries of Egyptian belief. Her unusual form, part fierce and part maternal, reflects the mixture of danger and hope that childbirth carried in this world. When illness strikes, a physician is called who blends what we would now separate into two different practices. Herbal remedies drawn from a known set of plants are measured and prepared according to written formulas preserved on papyrus scrolls such as the Ebers papyrus. Spoken spells and protective charms often accompany the treatment, addressed to the gods believed to govern sickness. Medicine and religion, in this world, are not seen as separate paths, but as parts of the same careful craft. For an open wound, honey is often applied directly, spread across the injury before it is bound with clean linen strips. Egyptian medical texts describe this treatment repeatedly, prescribing honey alongside grease and lint for cuts and burns. Modern laboratory studies have since confirmed that honey does possess antibacterial properties, lending an unexpected accuracy to a practice thousands of years old. A wound dressed this way was left to heal beneath its sweet sealing layer. For pain or fever, the bark of the willow tree growing along the riverbank finds its way into remedies, chewed, boiled, or ground into a paste. Centuries later, chemists would isolate from willow the compound that became aspirin, but here it is simply known through use, passed down as a trusted household treatment. A physician or a mother alike might reach for it when a child ran hot with fever. Its bitter taste was, by all accounts, endured rather than enjoyed. Each year, the river withdraws and leaves behind a fine dark layer of silt across the fields it has covered. This sediment, carried down from distant highlands far to the south, replenishes the soil's fertility without any effort from the farmers who benefit from it. Fields that might elsewhere grow thin and exhausted are renewed season after season by this quiet gift of the flood. It is this rhythm, more than any other single fact, that made a long-settled civilization possible along these banks. The flood itself carries a name of its own among the farmers who depend upon it, called the inundation, and around it the entire yearly calendar bends. Fields lie underwater for weeks, while the river swells beyond its banks, swallowing footpaths and marking boundary stones with a temporary tide. Farmers count months, not by a fixed almanac, but by this rising and falling water, dividing their year into flood, growth, and harvest. Nothing in the valley moves without reference to this single recurring event. A stepped stone shaft near the riverbank holds carved markings that rise from its base like the rungs of a ladder, built to measure the river's climb. Priests and officials descend to these Nilometers daily during flood season, noting the water's height against the etched scale. A generous rise promises abundant harvests, while a shallow one warns of leaner months ahead. The measurements are recorded carefully, becoming numbers that matter far beyond the riverbank itself. Numbers taken from the Nilometer travel from the riverside to the offices of scribes far inland, where they shape decisions about that year's taxes. A high flood suggests fields will yield well, and levies are set accordingly, while a poor flood brings some relief to farming households. Officials compare each year's reading against records kept from seasons long past, watching for patterns across decades. The river, in this way, quietly manages the treasury of the entire land. Once the floodwaters withdraw and the black silt has settled, farmers walk out into fields transformed from lake back into workable earth. Seeds of wheat and barley go into the ground almost immediately, pressed into the softened soil by hand or by simple wooden tools. These two grains form the backbone of Egyptian diet, one destined mostly for bread, the other often set aside for brewing. Growth comes quickly in this renewed soil, urged along by steady sun and reliable irrigation. Beside the grain fields, farmers cultivate flax, a slender plant whose fibers become something far more valuable once processed. Its stalks are harvested and later spun into linen thread, the fabric worn throughout Egyptian society, regardless of class. Its seeds, meanwhile, are pressed to yield oil, used both in cooking and in lamps that later light evening homes. A single plant, in this way, serves both the wardrobe and the kitchen of the household. Let your jaw loosen now, the way a held door finally settles into its frame. There is no need to hold your face still any longer, no need to keep your brow drawn tight against the day. Let your eyelids grow heavy, heavier than they've felt in hours, until closing them feels less like choice and more like rest arriving on its own. Somewhere behind those closed eyes, the light grows dim and soft, a place with no task waiting, only stillness spreading outward from your face down through your shoulders, down through your hands, further and further, until sleep simply begins. Garden plots near the village hold rows of onions, garlic, and leeks, staples that appear in meals across every level of Egyptian society. Onions in particular carry symbolic weight, sometimes placed among burial offerings for their layered form thought to represent eternity. Garlic finds use both in cooking and in household remedies, believed to ward off certain ailments. These modest vegetables, tended in small garden beds near the water, round out a diet built mostly around bread and grain. Vineyards stretch along certain stretches of riverbank, tended carefully for the grapes that will become wine for temples and noble tables. Workers press the fruit by foot in shallow stone vats, their motion turning ripe clusters into dark, foaming juice. The wine that results is often labeled with its vineyard, vintage, and quality on sealed jars, a practice that has left behind some of Egypt's earliest written records of production. Beer remains the common drink of the household, but wine belongs to feasts and offerings. Date palms rise along canal edges and village borders, their friends offering both shade and a steady yield of fruit through the warmer months. Dates are eaten fresh when ripe, sweet, and soft from the tree, or dried and stored for months when the harvest season has passed. Dried dates travel well, becoming a portable food for laborers, travelers, and soldiers moving along the valley roads. The palm itself asks little of the farmer, standing resilient through drought and flood alike. Sycamore fig trees, broad and heavy-limbed, grow near villages and temple grounds, valued as much for their shade as for their fruit. Workers pause beneath their wide canopies during the hottest hours, resting on roots that break through the packed earth like old furniture. The figs themselves, smaller and less sweet than the dates nearby, are still gathered and eaten, sometimes offered at shrines dedicated to household gods. Egyptians of this era regarded the sycamore fig as something close to sacred, a tree bridging the living world and the realm beyond. Cattle wander the riverbank grasses through the dry months, herded by boys with long switches cut from tamarisk branches. As the floodplain shrinks under the sun, these grazing strips near the water become the last green ground for miles. Herders know the safe paths between mud flats, guiding the animals away from soft ground that might swallow a hoof. The cattle themselves, often marked or counted for tax purposes, represent real wealth to their owners. Hunting parties push into the marsh reeds where waterfowl gather by the thousands, their calls rising from hidden channels among the papyrus stands. Men wade through shallow water in small skiffs, moving carefully so as not to scatter the birds before they are close enough to strike. Tomb paintings from this era show these hunts as scenes of pleasure as much as necessity, nobles standing in reed boats with a cat, sometimes trained to retrieve the fallen prey. The marsh itself, dense and humming with insects, feels like a different world from the open fields nearby. A curved throwing stick, weighted and shaped by hand, becomes the hunter's chosen tool among the papyrus thickets. Thrown low and fast, it can bring down a bird in flight without the need for costly arrows. Surviving examples of these sticks, carved from acacia wood, have been found in tombs alongside painted images of their use. The skill takes years to master, passed from father to son, along the same reed-choked channels their families have hunted for generations. Hippos drifting near the reed banks draw a different kind of attention, one shaped by fear rather than sport. These animals can wreck a season's planting in a single night, trampling young shoots or capsizing a careless boat along the shallows. Hunting them requires harpoons and considerable nerve, often carried out from several boats working together. Farmers along the river regard the hippo as a genuine threat to their livelihood, despite its familiar, almost lazy presence in the water. Crocodiles stretch along the warm mud of the riverbank through the afternoon, motionless but for an occasional shift toward deeper shade. Villagers give these stretches of shoreline a wide path, especially where the reeds thin and the water runs slow and clear. The animals seem indifferent to passing boats, content to hold their place in the sun for hours at a time. Their presence along nearly every stretch of the Nile has shaped how people move, work, and even worship near the water. Sobek, shown with the head of a crocodile, receives offerings meant to calm the very danger his image represents. Temples devoted to him rise near stretches of river known for large crocodile populations, their priests said to tend live crocodiles kept in temple pools. Worshippers ask Sobek for protection while traveling the water, treating the god less as a threat than as a guardian who understands the river's hidden dangers. Small amulets bearing his form are carried by fishermen and boatmen alike. Let your breath begin to slow now, each inhale a little shorter than the exhale that follows. Feel the air move in without effort, then leave you in one long, unhurried release. There is no need to guide it further than this. With each breath out, let your shoulders sink a little deeper into whatever is holding you. The next inhale will come on its own, the way the river keeps rising and falling, without anyone asking it to. Papyrus reeds, tall and triangular in cross-section, are cut in bundles along shallow water where they grow thickest. Workers select stalks of a certain thickness and age, knowing that younger or older reeds will not yield the fine, even sheets that scribes demand. The outer green rind is stripped away first, leaving the pale inner pith that holds the true material for writing. This harvest happens along the same marshy stretches where fishermen and hunters spend their mornings. The pale pith taken from each stalk is sliced into thin strips, then laid out in overlapping layers, one row set crosswise over another. Pressed beneath weighted boards for a number of days, the plant's natural sugars bind the layers into a single sheet as the moisture slowly leaves. Once dried and polished smooth with a stone or shell, the sheet becomes fit for a scribe's brush. This process, refined over centuries, gives Egypt one of history's first true forms of paper. Bundled papyrus stalks, lashed tightly together at bow and stern, form the light reed boats that fishermen and hunters have used along the Nile for generations. Buoyant and easy to repair, these vessels ride high in the water, suited to the shallow channels and marsh crossings where heavier boats cannot follow. A single boat might last only a season or two before the reeds soften and give way, but new ones are quick to build from the same abundant marsh growth. Their curved upturned prows, a shape echoed later in larger wooden ships, remain one of the river's oldest silhouettes. Wooden hulls carry heavier loads than any reed vessel could bear, their planks fitted edge to edge and bound with rope lashings before caulking seals the seams. A single mast rises from the center of the deck, holding a broad linen sail that can be raised or lowered depending on the wind. These larger boats haul granite, timber, and grain across distances that would exhaust a papyrus skiff. Shipwrights near the riverbank shape each plank by eye, judging curvature from years of practice rather than written measure. No road network in the valley matters as much as the river itself, since nearly everything of weight or distance moves by water rather than by foot or cart. Villages, temples, and quarries all sit within reach of some landing or mooring post along its banks. Overland travel exists, but it is slow, dusty, and reserved for short distances between fields and homes. For anything larger, the current becomes the only road worth trusting. Heading upstream, toward the south, sailors raise their linen sails to catch the wind blowing against the river's flow. Without that wind, rowing alone would make the journey grueling and slow. Captains watch the sky and the reeds along the bank for any sign the breeze is shifting. A well-timed departure can carry a boat a great distance before the sun grows too fierce for the crew to work comfortably. Heading downstream toward the north, boats need no wind at all, since the river's own current does the work of pulling them along. Sails are lowered and lashed to the mast, and the crew rests or steers gently with long oars. This natural rhythm, wind one direction and current the other, shapes nearly every journey along the valley. Sailors plan their trips around it the way farmers plan around the flood. Along this stretch of the valley, the wind almost always moves from north to south, blowing steadily against the river's southward flowing current. This near-constant pattern lets sailors travel in either direction without needing engines or great effort, one force pushing against the other in a balance rare among the world's rivers. Traders and officials alike rely on this arrangement without ever fully understanding its cause. It simply is, season after season, as dependable as the flood itself. Once harvest gathers the season's wheat and barley, flat-bottomed barges carry the grain downstream toward the royal storehouses. Sacks are stacked high along the deck, watched over by scribes who tally each load before it leaves the village landing. These barges move slower than lighter craft, weighed down by the year's labor, now bound for state granaries. Their arrival marks the true close of the farming season. Massive limestone and granite blocks, cut from quarries far upriver, travel to temple sites by barge rather than overland cart. Wooden sledges ease the stones onto the deck, where ropes and timber bracing keep them from shifting during the crossing. A single block might require dozens of men working in careful coordination just to load it safely. Once afloat, the river carries weight that no team of oxen could ever haul across open desert. Let the weight of your body settle now, beginning at your feet, as though the mattress beneath them is slowly rising to meet their full shape. Feel that heaviness move upward, through the ankles, the calves, the knees, each part giving over its effort to something that holds it without asking anything back. Your hips sink next, then your lower back, pressed into stillness by nothing more than gravity and time. Let this heaviness travel all the way to your fingertips, until even lifting a hand feels like more than you need to do tonight. By afternoon, the workshop districts near the temple grounds remain full of motion, though the pace has eased from the morning's brisk start. Carpenters still shape wood, potters still turn their wheels, and the low hum of hammered stone continues from the mason's yard nearby. Apprentices run errands between shops, carrying tools, water, or half-finished pieces from one craftsman to another. The heat has thinned the crowds outside, but inside these shaded workrooms, labor carries steadily on. Inside a goldsmith's workshop, small crucibles glow over charcoal fires as raw gold softens toward a liquid state. Workers pour the molten metal into simple clay or stone molds shaped for rings, collars, or ceremonial pieces destined for temple or palace use. Once cooled, the rough casting is filed, polished, and sometimes inlaid with colored stone or glass paste. This careful, patient labor turns raw ore into objects meant to signal divine favor and royal wealth alike. Far from the river's edge, the gold that fills these workshop molds begins its journey in the eastern desert, where dry valleys cut through granite hills toward the Red Sea. Miners work narrow shafts and open trenches, following veins of quartz laced with metal. Crushed ore is ground on stone slabs, then washed to separate the gold from grit. Donkey caravans carry the yield back across weeks of barren track to the Nile Valley's workshops. Within a temple scribal chamber, a trained hand draws careful columns of hieroglyphs onto a fresh papyrus sheet. The scroll before him copies a hymn meant for temple use, its ink black and red, its lines measured by eye rather than ruler. Older, worn scrolls lie nearby as the source text, their edges soft from years of handling. Producing a single finished copy may take the better part of a day, undertaken with unhurried, exacting care. Among the texts most often copied is a collection of spells and instructions meant to guide a soul through the dangers of the afterlife. Passages describe the correct words to speak before divine judges, the proper offerings to request, and the paths to avoid within the underworld. Wealthier families commission personalized versions, painted with small illustrations, to be placed within the coffin. For those who can afford it, the scroll becomes a kind of traveling companion into death. Elsewhere in the temple compound, another scribe bends over a different kind of record, tallying how many days of labor each village owes the state this season. Building projects, canal repairs, and temple expansions all draw on this rotating obligation, known informally as corvée duty. Names and villages are listed alongside the number of days already served. The arithmetic here shapes how many hands will appear at a construction site come the following month. In a village lane shaded by palm fronds, an older man known to his neighbors settles a disagreement over boundary stones between two adjoining plots. He listens to each side in turn, standing between them in the dust of the path. Such headmen hold no formal rank granted by the crown, yet their word carries weight built from years of trusted judgment. Most disputes never travel further than this quiet exchange beneath the trees. When a dispute does escalate, it reaches a local court known as the kenbet, where a panel of respected men, sometimes including a scribe, hears the matter formally. Witnesses speak, and their statements are recorded on papyrus for the record. Surviving court documents from villages like Deir el-Medina describe cases over stolen tools, unpaid debts, and disputed inheritances. The written verdict, once reached, becomes part of an official archive kept by the local temple. Judgments handed down by these courts vary according to the offense and the means of the accused. Fines paid in grain or goods settle many disputes, while more serious matters may bring a beating administered publicly as both punishment and warning. Forced labor on state projects serves as another common sentence, binding the guilty to canal digging or brick hauling for a set term. The severity of Egyptian law, recorded in these fragmentary court papers, still leaves many specifics of everyday enforcement uncertain. Inside the walled compound of a wealthy household, servants move between the kitchen and the shaded dining hall, preparing the afternoon meal. Clay ovens hold flatbread baking beside simmering pots of lentils and vegetables. A cook checks a jar of preserved fish pulled from storage, while another servant arranges bowls of dates and figs on a low table. The household's comfort rests entirely on this quiet, coordinated labor moving unseen behind mud brick walls. Somewhere beyond the walls, a low hum rises and fades on the wind, the kind of sound a house makes when it settles into evening. It might be voices from a distant courtyard, or simply air moving through reed thatch overhead. It comes without hurry, and leaves the same way, asking nothing of you as it passes. Let your breathing find that same rhythm now, rising, falling, arriving, and drifting off again, needing no destination beyond this next slow breath. On ordinary days, the meal on most tables leans heavily toward bread, vegetables, and grain rather than meat. Duck, goose, and beef appear more often at festivals, religious offerings, or the tables of the wealthy who can afford regular slaughter. A household might mark a birth, a good harvest, or a temple holiday by roasting fowl over an open fire. For most families along the river, such meals remain a welcome exception rather than a daily habit. Bread, onions, and garden greens make up the greater share of what most families eat across the growing season. Lentils and beans supply protein where meat rarely reaches the table, stretched further with garlic and leeks grown along the riverbank. A bowl of stewed vegetables in oil, eaten alongside coarse bread, satisfies the body without draining the household's modest stores. This pattern of eating, plain and repeated, sustains generation after generation along the valley. Wealthy households mark their status through what appears on the banqueting table. Jars of wine, dried fruits from distant oases, and cuts of imported oil find their way to platters arranged on carved wooden stands. Fine tableware of polished stone and painted pottery replaces the coarse clay used by farming families. Guests recline on cushioned mats while servants carry dish after dish, each course a quiet display of the household's reach beyond the valley. Beyond the heat of the open fields, noble families retreat to courtyards planted with sycamore and tamarisk trees. Wide branches cast deep shade across stone benches and painted walls, cutting the harshest hours of sun into something bearable. Servants tend the trees and clear fallen leaves from swept paths. Here, away from dust and labor, conversation moves slowly, matching the stillness of the garden air. A rectangular pool set into the courtyard floor cools the air around it and reflects the surrounding trees. Built from carved stone and lined with plaster, the pool draws its water from a nearby canal fed by the Nile itself. Fish sometimes swim within it, kept as much for beauty as for food. On the hottest afternoons, family members sit near its edge, drawn to the faint relief the water offers. Across the still surface of these garden pools, blue and white lotus blossoms open with the daylight and close as evening nears. Egyptians prize the flower for its beauty and for its association with rebirth and the rising sun. Petals drift loose upon the water, gathered sometimes for garlands worn at feasts. The pool's calm surface, dotted with these blooms, becomes a small mirror of the wider river beyond the walls. Within these courtyards, the sound of harp and flute drifts from a corner, where musicians sit cross-legged upon woven mats. Strings are plucked in slow, repeating patterns while a flute weaves a higher line above them. Musicians often perform without written notation, passing melodies down through practiced memory. Their music accompanies conversation, drink, and the falling light of late afternoon, never meant to dominate the room. When the household gathers for celebration, dancers move barefoot across the swept courtyard floor. Fitted linen and looped bead necklaces mark their movement, clapping hands from onlookers setting the rhythm. Tomb paintings preserve these scenes in vivid detail, showing dancers bent backward or leaping mid-stride. Such performances mark births, marriages, and religious festivals alike, threading music and motion through the household's most memorable days. As evening approaches, a carved wooden board marked with 30 squares comes out from a chest kept near the household's finer furniture. Two players move ivory or faience pieces across the grid, casting throwing sticks or knucklebones to determine each move. Senet appears in homes both humble and grand, played through long afternoons and into candlelight. Its rules, though only partly understood today, clearly reward patience over haste. Beyond simple amusement, Senet carries deeper meaning for the players who move their pieces across its squares. The board represents the soul's passage through the dangers of the afterlife toward final rest among the stars. Winning a game came to be seen, in later belief, as a favorable sign for the journey still to come. Painted tomb scenes show the dead playing Senet against unseen opponents, the board bridging the world of the living and the realm beyond it. Let warmth begin now in your hands, spreading slowly across the palms and into each finger, heavy and unhurried. Let it climb into your wrists, then your arms, loosening whatever tightness the day left behind. Feel it settle into your shoulders next, sinking down through your chest like sunlight held in stone after the day has ended. Let it pool in your stomach, your hips, down through your legs to your feet, until the whole body rests, warm and unmoving, ready for sleep. Small stone pallets hold ground malachite and galena, mixed with a touch of fat or oil into thick paste. Women and men both apply these colors around the eyes each morning, using slender applicator sticks of wood or bone. Green malachite traces the lower lid, while dark galena rings the upper lash line. The routine belongs as much to health as vanity, part of a face readied for the day's brightness. Kohl eyeliner does more than shape the eyes against harsh daylight along the river. Its mineral base reduces glare bouncing off water and pale sand, easing strain during long hours outdoors. Some ingredients within the mixture also carry mild antibacterial properties, offering protection against infections common in a dusty, insect-heavy climate. Physicians and priests alike recommend its daily use, blending practical medicine with the appearance favored at court. Elaborate wigs crown the heads of nobles and officials throughout the Nile Valley. Woven from human hair set onto a fiber mesh base, they are styled into tight curls or long-plaited sections depending on fashion and rank. Wig shops near the Temple District maintain stocks of finished pieces alongside tools for restyling older ones. Beneath such wigs, most Egyptians keep their natural hair cropped close, better suited to heat and cleanliness. Linen dominates every wardrobe from field hand to palace official, its light weave a natural answer to relentless heat. Flax fibers, spun fine or coarse depending on intended use, are woven into garments ranging from simple kilts to draped robes. The fabric breathes easily against skin, cool even under direct sun, and dries quickly after washing in the river. Nearly every household owns some version of this same enduring cloth. Pleats folded into fine linen mark a wearer as someone of standing along the riverbank towns. Servants press these folds using wooden boards and careful handwork, a labor-intensive process reserved for garments belonging to officials and nobility. The finer the pleating and the more elaborate the drape, the higher the rank it likely signals to onlookers. Commoners wear plainer, unpleated versions cut from coarser thread. Necklaces, bracelets, and rings crafted from gold, carnelian, and faience, adorn the bodies of the wealthy across the valley. Beyond simple adornment, each piece often carries symbolic weight, meant to invoke protection from a specific deity or force. Wealth displayed openly through jewelry also communicates status within a rigid social order. Even modest households own small amulets, connecting rich and poor through shared belief in ornament's protective power. Carved into rings, pendants, and seals, the scarab beetle appears throughout Egyptian daily life as a symbol of renewal. Egyptians observed the beetle rolling balls of dung across the ground and linked this behavior to the sun's own daily journey across the sky. The god Khepri, often shown with a scarab's head, represents this cycle of rising and becoming. Small scarab amulets are worn by many, tucked beneath garments as quiet protection. Beyond the workshops of the living, hammers and chisels continue their steady work deep within the cliffs across the river. Laborers cut fresh chambers from limestone, following plans laid out by architects and overseen by scribes tracking progress daily. Dust hangs thick in narrow passages, lit only by simple oil lamps reflected off polished copper mirrors. The tombs taking shape here are meant to outlast the empires that commission them. Not far from the burial grounds, a walled settlement houses the families responsible for this endless labor. Modest mud brick homes line narrow streets, each dwelling assigned to a worker and passed through generations of the same trade. The village sits deliberately apart from farmland and river traffic, its purpose tied entirely to the tombs being carved nearby. Guards control access, keeping the community's specialized work discreet from outsiders. This settlement, later known by the name Deir el-Medina, holds generations of artisans, painters, and stonecutters devoted entirely to royal tombs. Records found within its ruins detail wages, absences, and even personal disputes among its residents, offering historians rare insight into ordinary lives long forgotten elsewhere. Families here pass skills from parent to child, each generation trained from childhood in the precise craft their fathers practiced before them. Somewhere beyond the last lamp, a thin curl of smoke rises from an ember left to burn itself out. It bends and drifts, never twice the same shape, dissolving before it reaches the ceiling. Let your thoughts do the same. Let each one rise, curl, and disappear without needing to be finished. There is only this slow unwinding, this smoke going nowhere in particular, this breath following it up and out. Payment for tomb work arrives not as coin, but as measured sacks of grain. Emmer, wheat, and barley form the backbone of wages, supplemented with fish, vegetables, and jars of beer. Scribes at Deir el-Medina keep careful tallies, recording each delivery against the days a man has worked. A household's fortune rises and falls with how faithfully these rations reach its door each month. When rations arrive late, the workers of the tomb village do not simply wait in silence. Records from the reign of Ramesses III describe laborers laying down their tools and marching toward the mortuary temples to demand their due. These are among the earliest documented labor strikes in human history. The protest is settled, eventually, with promises and partial payment, and the chisels return to the stone. Inside the tomb chambers, painters kneel close to the rock, brushes loaded with mineral pigment. They render scenes of harvest, feasting, and boat building across the walls, each figure rendered in profile with careful, practiced hands. These are not idle decorations, but a kind of eternal provision meant to surround the dead with the abundance of the world they left behind. Ochre, malachite green, and soot black dominate the palette. Above the painted figures, columns of hieroglyphic text run in careful vertical lines. These inscriptions hold spells drawn from funerary texts meant to guide and protect the soul on its journey beyond death. Scribes copy them from established templates, adjusting names and titles for whichever noble or official will rest within. The words are considered as functional as any tool, meant to be spoken and to work. In workshops near the necropolis, sculptors shape stone and wood into likenesses meant to outlast flesh. A statue carved with care can serve as a resting place for the soul, should the mummified body ever fail. Proportions follow strict conventions passed down through generations of craftsmen, each pose and gesture carrying meaning beyond mere likeness. The finished figure is sealed within a tomb chamber, facing eastward toward the rising sun. Death, in this valley, is treated as a passage requiring preparation rather than an ending to be feared. Bodies are carried to workshops on the west bank, where specialists begin a lengthy process of preservation. The aim is to keep the physical form intact, enough for the soul to recognize and return to it. Without this care, Egyptians believe, the journey into the afterlife cannot properly continue. Skilled embalmers work with practiced, unhurried hands, removing the internal organs one by one. The lungs, stomach, liver, and intestines are each cleaned, treated, and placed into a separate container known as a canopic jar. Each jar bears the carved head of one of 4 protective deities, sons of the god Horus, assigned to guard its specific organ. The jars are later arranged near the sealed coffin within the tomb. The heart alone remains within the body, considered the seat of thought, memory, and moral character. Egyptians believe it will be needed later, weighed before the gods to determine the soul's fate. Removing it, embalmers understand, would leave a person without the very organ that speaks for them in judgment. Every other organ may leave the body except this one. To draw moisture from the body, embalmers pack it inside and out with natron, a naturally occurring salt gathered from dry lake beds in the desert. Over the following weeks, the salt drinks away the body's fluids, leaving skin and tissue preserved against decay. Linen packets of natron are tucked into the cavity, replaced as they grow damp. The whole workshop carries a faint mineral scent, dry and clean, unlike anything found along the river itself. 70 days pass, by tradition, from the first incision to the final wrapping. This span is not arbitrary. It echoes the 70 days the star Sopdet disappears from the night sky before returning to signal the coming flood. Embalmers, wrapping specialists, and priests each take their turn across these weeks, layering resin, linen, and prayer. Families wait through this long interval, visiting the workshop only when summoned for the burial itself. Let the jaw loosen now, the way a rope loosens once the knot is finally undone. There is no need to hold any expression at all. The muscles around the eyes may rest their small, constant work, and the eyelids may grow heavier than they have felt in hours. Behind closed eyes, the dark is wide and undemanding, asking nothing, offering only itself. Let the face become still, the way water becomes still once the wind has passed. In the hall of judgment, the heart of the deceased is placed upon one side of a great scale. On the other side rests a single feather, belonging to Mahat, the goddess of truth, balance, and cosmic order. If the heart is lighter than the feather, unburdened by wrongdoing, the soul may pass onward. If it is heavier, weighted by falsehood or cruelty, a different fate awaits. The jackal-headed god Anubis stands beside the scale, steadying it with careful attention. Long associated with embalming and the protection of the dead, he is trusted to conduct this weighing without favor or error. Egyptian belief holds that Anubis guides each soul from the moment of death through this exact threshold. His presence marks the boundary between the world of the living and whatever lies beyond it. Beyond the scale sits Osiris, ruler of the afterlife, upon a low throne within a dim, columned hall. Once a king of Egypt himself, according to old myth, he now presides over the fates of all who arrive after death. Souls whose hearts prove true are welcomed into his fields, a place of eternal green and plenty. Souls found wanting are said to be consumed and cease to exist entirely. When the days of preparation end, the funeral procession sets out from the eastern bank toward the west. Mourners walk or ride in small boats, following the coffin as it is ferried across the river's calm water. Priests, family members, and hired mourners accompany the journey, their voices raised in ritual lament. The crossing itself is treated as part of the passage from one existence into the next. Everything on the western side of the river belongs, in some sense, to the dead. The setting sun disappears there each evening, and Egyptians read this daily vanishing as a fitting symbol for the journey beyond life. Tombs, temples of the dead, and burial workshops cluster along these dry cliffs and desert edges. Few people live permanently on this bank. It is a place visited, not inhabited. Across the water, the eastern bank hums with the ordinary business of living. Homes, granaries, markets, and the great temples of the gods stand along its fertile fringe. Fields stretch green and full where the river's yearly floodwaters have done their work. This division between the two banks shapes nearly every aspect of Egyptian ritual geography, from where people build to where they are eventually laid to rest. To protect the dead from those who might disturb their rest, tomb builders often choose steep, hidden cliffs far from easy paths. Entrances are sometimes concealed behind rubble or sealed with hidden doorways, their locations known only to a trusted few. Despite these precautions, robbery remained a persistent problem throughout Egyptian history, driving builders toward ever more elaborate concealment. Some tombs were cut so deep into rock that their passageways stretch for many meters before reaching the burial chamber itself. Alongside the body, tombs are filled with objects meant to serve the deceased in the world to come. Furniture, tools, jewelry, food offerings, and small figurines are arranged carefully within the burial chamber. A wealthy household might include finely carved chairs, painted chests, and vessels once used in daily life. Everything placed there is chosen with the belief that the next existence will require much the same comforts as this one. Small carved figures rest inside many tombs, meant to labor on behalf of the dead. Called shabtis, these little statues are inscribed with spells instructing them to answer when called upon in the afterlife. Wealthy burials might include hundreds, one for every day of the year, ready to plow fields or carry water in the god Osiris's realm. A person's rest beyond death, Egyptians believed, need not mean endless toil. Light over the Nile Valley shifts toward gold as the sun tilts west. Shadows lengthen across the fields, stretching long from palm trunks and mud-brick walls. Heat that pressed down at midday begins to loosen its hold on the land. Birds stir in the reeds, and the river's surface catches the changing color of the sky. Let your breath settle now, slow and unhurried, like water finding its own level. Notice the small pause after each breath leaves you, that quiet gap before the next one begins. With every exhale, let it stretch a little longer than the one before. There is no need to breathe in any particular way, only to notice the rhythm already carrying you, in and out, toward rest. Workers drift back from the fields as the heat of the day loosens. Hoes and baskets are slung over shoulders, dust rising faintly from tired feet along the footpaths. Conversation is sparse, mostly the shuffle of sandals and the creak of wooden tools. Home, with its promise of shade and food, pulls each figure steadily along the familiar path. Goats and cattle are guided from riverside pastures back toward the village. Children often manage this task, calling and tapping animals gently with sticks to keep them moving. Dust rises from many hooves along the packed earth road. By the time the enclosures come into view, the animals seem to know the way themselves, quickening their pace toward familiar pens. Papyrus boats glide back toward the riverbank as evening approaches. Fishermen haul in nets heavy with catfish, tilapia, and perch, the river's daily offering. Baskets are loaded and carried up the bank toward waiting households. The work is familiar, repeated every evening for as long as anyone in the village can remember. Fish brought in from the river is scaled, gutted, and prepared near the household hearth. Some is set aside for immediate cooking over open flame, while the rest is salted and laid out to dry for later use. Women manage this task with practiced hands, knives moving quickly through the day's catch. The smell of fish and wood smoke settles over the courtyard as evening approaches. Inside the temple, the day's rituals draw to their close. Priests move through the same sequence performed each morning, now reversed, as incense is extinguished and offerings are cleared away. The great doors of the inner sanctuary are swung shut once more, sealed as they were before dawn. Darkness settles over the god's chamber until the sun rises again to wake it. One final ritual marks the end of the temple day. A priest presents a last offering before the sealed shrine, murmuring words recorded since the temple's founding. Bread, beer, and flowers are laid upon a low altar, gifts meant to sustain the god through the coming night. With this act completed, the sanctuary falls silent until morning. At home, the household gathers for the largest meal of the day. Bread, vegetables, and whatever fish or grain the day has provided are set out on a low table or mat. Parents and children eat together, often joined by grandparents living under the same roof. This shared meal, more than any other moment, draws the family's day to its natural close. Darkness thickens beyond the courtyard walls, and small clay lamps are set into wall niches throughout the house. A twist of linen wick floats in oil, drawing flame upward into a low, steady glow. This single point of light is often all a family needs, cast across closed walls and familiar faces. Beyond its reach, the mud brick lanes fall into deep shadow. Castor and sesame plants, grown along the field margins, supply most of the oil that fuels these household flames. Seeds are pressed by hand or with simple stone tools, the oil collected in small jars for daily use. It burns with little smoke, a quality valued in enclosed rooms without windows. Farmers who tend these crops rarely think of them as anything but ordinary, useful things. Voices settle into a different rhythm once the meal is cleared away. An older relative begins a familiar tale, the kind told so many times its shape no longer needs thought. Children lean close, half in shadow, half lit by the lamp's glow. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's voice rises briefly in song before fading back into the murmur of the lane. Feel the weight of the day settling into your limbs now, one by one. Let your feet grow heavy first, pressing down as if the floor itself were rising gently to hold them. That heaviness climbs slowly upward, into the legs, into the hips, sinking without effort. Let it reach your shoulders, your arms, your open hands, until every part of you rests, held, unmoving, sinking into stillness. Stories of the gods pass from one generation to the next in these lamplit hours, carried by voice alone. No written scroll reaches most households, so memory becomes the vessel for sacred history. Grandparents shape the tales much as their own grandparents once did, adjusting little. In this way, the myths outlive any single mouth that speaks them. Among these stories, the tale of Isis and Osiris returns again and again through the centuries. A murdered god, a devoted wife, a son who grows to avenge his father, and a promise of life beyond death. Egyptians across many generations hear this same account, told with only small variations from house to house. Its themes echo through temple ritual and tomb inscription alike, far beyond this single evening. On a low wooden board, a game continues by lamplight, its carved pieces sliding across painted squares. Family members take turns tossing knucklebones or throwing sticks to determine each move. Laughter is quiet, contained within the small circle of light. The game may run late, unhurried, with no reason to finish before sleep finally calls. Before the household settles for the night, small prayers are spoken before the shrine kept in a corner of the home. A modest statue or painted niche represents the family's chosen protector among the gods. Offerings of bread or a few flowers rest before it, simple and unremarkable to the eye. These quiet words close the day, much as temple rites closed it earlier, on a smaller, more personal scale. Outside, dogs kept by the village take up their evening posts near doorways and low walls. Their barking carries occasionally across the dark lanes, answered by another dog further off. These animals guard against jackals and thieves alike, valued companions rather than mere property. Their presence lets sleeping households rest a little easier as the night deepens. Above the valley, the sky opens into a wide field of stars, undimmed by any city glow. The same constellations that guided priests in counting the calendar now watch over sleeping villages. Somewhere, a scribe or priest might still be tracing their slow paths, but most eyes below are already closed. The Nile itself lies dark and still beneath that vast, silent sky. Low along the eastern horizon, just before true dawn, a single bright star announces itself each year at the same season. This is Sirius, called Soptit by those who track it, and its return marks the coming rise of the Nile's floodwaters. Farmers await this signal as surely as they await rain elsewhere. For generations the star has arrived at the same point in the yearly cycle, faithful as the river itself. Rooftop priests hold instruments of sighting, watching the eastern sky in the hour before sunrise. Their task is to mark the exact morning when Sirius first reappears after weeks of absence, an event known to us now as its heliacal rising. Temple records preserve these observations, carried out year after year with careful attention. From this single sighting, the entire ceremonial calendar is set in motion. 3 seasons shape the Egyptian year, each tied to the river rather than to the turning of leaves or snow. Akhet brings the flood, Perit the growing season after the waters withdraw, and Shemu the dry harvest months. Each season spans roughly 4 months, divided further into 30-day units. This threefold rhythm orders temple festivals, farming labor, and tax collection alike. Along temple walls and palace corridors, watchmen carry small oil lamps through the darkened passageways. Their duty is to guard against thieves, fire, and any disturbance to the sacred grounds while priests and nobles sleep. They move past storerooms, shrines, and sleeping quarters, footsteps echoing faintly on stone floors. Their vigilance allows the rest of the household, and the gods within the temple, to remain undisturbed until morning. Somewhere beyond the walls, a low hum drifts through the night air, rising and fading like breath. It might be wind moving through distant palm fronds, or the murmur of the river sliding past its banks. The sound comes close, then withdraws, then returns again, never quite the same twice. There is no need to trace its source. Let it simply pass by, again and again, until the body grows heavy and the mind grows still. Through the night hours, offerings and hymns turn toward Khonsu, the moon god who travels the sky while the sun rests below the world. His presence is felt in the pale light falling over rooftops and fields alike. Priests associate him with healing and with the passage of time, since the moon's changing shape marks the passing months. Small shrines sometimes bear his image, quietly watching over the sleeping valley. Temple hymns sung after dark describe a different kind of morning still to come. They tell of Ra boarding his solar bark each evening, descending into the underworld to travel through 12 dark regions before dawn. In these verses, the sun god passes through caverns, meets the souls of the dead, and confronts trials along a hidden river. The hymns are sung low, almost as a lullaby, guiding listeners through the god's unseen passage. Among the dangers faced on that nightly voyage, one adversary appears again and again in temple texts. Apep, the great serpent, waits to halt the sun's bark and plunge the world into permanent darkness. Each night, Ra and his companions are said to hold the serpent back through ritual combat described in sacred writings. Priests recite protective spells at dusk specifically to aid in this unseen struggle, believing their words strengthen the sun god's passage. By the deepest hour of night, the sun is thought to be swallowed entirely, vanished into darkness much as it seems to vanish beneath the horizon. Egyptian belief held that Ra passed through the body of the sky itself before returning renewed. This idea of nightly death and morning rebirth threads through temple carvings and coffin texts alike. The coming sunrise, then, is never simply a sunrise, but a small return from the edge of the underworld. Behind heavy wooden doors, the temple's inner sanctuary remains closed through the entire night. No priest will enter again until the proper purification rites are performed at first light tomorrow. The god's statue rests undisturbed within its shrine, wrapped in silence and the faint scent of last night's incense. Outside, the valley itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for that same dawn ritual to begin the cycle once more. Most households along the valley sleep beneath the open sky rather than indoors. Mudbrick walls hold the day's heat long after sunset, so families climb narrow stairs to flat rooftops where the air moves freely. Woven mats and linen sheets are spread beside low parapets. Children curl close to parents, and the rooftop becomes a shared room open to the stars, used this way in nearly every village along the river. Wind drawn down from the desert cools the rooftops once the sun has fully set. This nightly breeze crosses the valley after the heat of the day breaks, brushing over palm fronds and settling the dust of the lanes below. It carries the faint scent of the river, of drying fish, of cooling mudbrick. For families lying beneath the stars, this movement of air is the only relief the season offers. Beneath the sleeping village, the river keeps its own steady motion. No festival pauses it, no household rises to watch it pass. The Nile moves on through the dark valley exactly as it has moved for generations before this night, carrying starlight faintly on its surface, indifferent to the sleep of the people who depend on it. Its sound is barely a whisper against the reeds. Egyptian belief held that this passage from day into night and back again was never simple repetition, but renewal. Ray's descent into darkness and his return each morning mirrored a larger promise woven through temple teaching and coffin text alike, that ending was never final. The dark hours were not feared as loss, but understood as necessary passage. Night, in this telling, is the doorway through which morning is remade. Far to the east, beyond the black shape of the cliffs, the sky begins its first faint change once more. The valley lies still, rooftops full of sleeping families, the river moving unseen below them. Soon priests will rise to break the temple's seal again. Farmers will watch the water's edge, and bread will rise in the dark ovens of another morning. The cycle asks for nothing but rest before it begins. Sleep now, as they slept then, beneath the same turning sky.